the people that God sends who don't know him better than a lot of us.
Yes.
Well, think about what I'm saying. You have a personal revelation of Jesus. But do you have a deep sense of moral compass or a sense of principles of right, wrong, true, false, and how the world ought to work that is so strong it doesn't bend in the winds of political correctness? See, Churchill and Lincoln and Trump are what you call common grace rulers. They are the rulers that have the grace of God common to all man, but it's particularly moving with favor on them because their compass is aligned with heaven for the assignment they got. Churchill's compass was perfect. Between cigars and scotch, he was the prophet that saw Hitler stronger than anyone else who was a teetotal and evangelical. He warned them about Hitler before anyone else did, and they thought it was so out of touch, they kicked him out of public office. Then when Hitler rose up with astonishing speed, Neville Chamberlain negotiated a peace that was crushed, and Poland had tanks rolling into it, they started to cry out, "Go get Winston." Why? Because that grumpy guy actually was prophetic. Lincoln was the same thing. He was not the favorite darling of the evangelicals because he didn't go to church. But yet his inaugural addresses speak more like sermons than most pastors do in pulpits. Driven to prayer and the Bible while he's in office. The man had a deeper walk with God with greater compassion and wisdom than most of the pastors who criticized because he didn't go to church. It's called the common grace Cyrus type. Trump is that kind of ruler. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah. Yes. Good.
When Pastor Brunson was in Turkey, in prison for 2 years, President Obama wants to take credit for the recovery, he should take credit for putting this guy in jail because he didn't do anything. He's not coming out. President Turkey doesn't have to. He's digging in. He's letting his people know he's not going to play ball with the United States unless the United States does what he wants him to do. Well, what happens is Trump, he picks his fights. And right now he needs Turkey in alignment with Syria and him and Israel, and he's got things he's doing because he's trying to corner Iran. He just wants Syria and Iran and Turkey. So he puts up with it. So Mike Pompeo comes in. Mike Pompeo is a Christian who prays. Mike Pence is a Christian who prays. Both of them got together. They met with the wife and the daughters of Pastor Brunson, and they promised them they were going to do what they could to get him out. The issue keeps coming back on the president's desk of unresolved issues. Then they make an appointment one day for the president to meet with the wife and the daughters. Just like with the pictures of the kids poisoned by sarin gas, Donald Trump has this powerful empathy factor people don't know. And he gets moved by other people's challenges. He wants to solve problems, though. And so he hears the situation with their father, with the husband, and they're crying, and he's sick, and we're afraid he's going to die. Trump calls in Pompeo. What are we doing? Well, we tried this, we tried pretty much everything. Trump's thinking about it. That night, he tweets. Turkey needs to release this innocent pastor. And I'm increasing the tariffs 50% on all exports of steel and aluminum starting tomorrow. What did he just do? He just said, I want him released. In private I want him released. You're not playing ball. So I'm going to go public. People don't understand complex issues. I'm just going to say, you've got a pastor illegally in prison, and I'm going to break you economically until you bring him out. And so he increased immediately. The Turkish currency goes into a free fall and decline. Because it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is going to wage economic war on you because you're being unrighteous. Pastor is released. Like the North Korean prison was released. Most people don't know it. There have been 9 releases of Americans in prison. And Trump says, but he doesn't finish the sentence, and on all the dingbat media refuses to cover it. He says, we've had 9 people return to the United States in circumstances like this. I get the impression that a lot of these governments really don't I think I have a theory as to why they don't want to keep them, but I'm not going to say anything. If you fill in the gap, it's because this guy protects evangelicals. And as much as you've done to the least of them, he takes it as though you're doing it to him. That's right. That's a shepherd. All right, so you've got all nations are going to go into the Valley of Decision. The Valley of Decision has already started. Most of us missed it. Just like the Feast of Purim just kicked off the next battle of the United States, by the way. What's going to happen with the midterms? I think the enemy's doing everything he can to suppress the enthusiasm and confidence of the righteous to show up, trying to embarrass them when we associate it with the brand. This is how the devil is a brilliant strategist. He will create some kind of association with an image that makes you feel cringeworthy or uncomfortable, so you back up from the image. That's how the enemy continues to always propagandize. But I think that there's enough education and insight that is now in the public that it is so cynical regarding news cycles that it gets provoked and irritated by the misrepresentation of news. Which means that it'll be interesting to see now in this litmus test how many people in the United States are under the control of media, or if it's what we think it is, an ever-diminishing power of influence because somehow people are getting information from other sources. Jordan Peterson over here stands in the education mountain as a Cyrus type. He's required to use gender pronouns in his class in Toronto and in Quebec, in Ontario rather, and he refuses to do so because he's a scholar. He's lectured at Harvard. He's a clinical psychologist, and he's a master in the study of Soviet propaganda, studying Solzhenitsyn and Dostoevsky, and he sees immediately that this is propagandizing of the academic field to cause academics to say what someone else wants them to say. But about 20 years ago, he started going through a process of personal growth. And this is where God was already at work in people's lives before they meet Jesus. And he came to the conclusion that too often he was depressed because he was going along with other people. He wasn't speaking what he really felt and believed. And he made a decision. He says this, I made a decision one day that I would stop saying things that made me weak. To have to say, pick your gender and identity fluidity when he knew the academic research behind it wouldn't pass a first-year, thesis paper exam in his class. When the shallow, scholastic work behind that big and architectural statement, he's going to attack. He said just he could not say it because it made him weak. They threatened him with the Human Rights Commission, not even a court, but a commission of fellow citizens who would determine if the speech was actually hate speech. In the possibility that it is hate speech, he would lose his tenure, he would lose his right to teach, he would lose his income, and he could possibly go to jail. He considered that if that's what they did, he would go on a hunger strike and he would die. He was willing, like Martin Luther, here I stand, I can do no other, may God help me. Yep. He had the courage to do what I wonder how many Christian professors just capitulated on. Because that's what can you do? It's the way the world is. It's the end times. Well, I hope Donald Trump did. Peterson didn't ask Donald Trump to do it. He's Canadian. He took a stand. He put his argument on YouTube. He said, here's why I'm doing this. The YouTube went viral. It went viral with a very interesting demographic. Millennials. 1 million millennials. Minority as well as white. Who finally found a professor who didn't talk down and didn't talk gobbledygook, but talked facts.
That's right.
And explain the rationale for living responsibly and with integrity and not saying things that make you weak.
That's right.
And it's like a rallying cry. Well, he had so much popularity, the administration now is befuddled, like the Pharisees trying to kill Jesus. They couldn't do it in daylight for fear of a riot. They have to figure out how to take this guy out at night. But Peterson had too big an audience. This is with freedom of speech and freedom of religion. This is the game we're up to now. We've got to take a position that is winsome enough so that we can bring and persuade people in alignment with our worldview. And you can't make it all about Jesus and the Bible. You have to find the issues that the enemy is working and stake out a position of truth, become informed, intelligent, and persuasive in the language they speak. Does that make sense? We'll get behind the people that do. But go ahead, young folks. Here, look up Jordan Peterson on YouTube. You'll be refreshed as you see him tackling all the lies that are in culture and doing it as an academic. But let me just finish this thing. Donald Trump then decides that on one boring night he decides that it's time for him to move the embassy for Israel. I think he was getting frustrated with Stormy Daniels' news and decided he wanted to change the news cycle. He does that.
Yeah.
So he said, I think I'm against the advice of his entire State Department loaded with Democrats in the Obama era. They said, no, it'd be too risky. It's going to foment instability. He goes, I don't think so. He makes the announcement, we're going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. In that moment, all hell breaks loose in the spirit realm. Why? because it's the 70th year of the nation of Israel. And now the president is pushing forward the question, does not this state have a right to exist?
Amen.
And so immediately the world goes into a free fall. The United Nations has a vote. And this is an important moment you got to catch, because a lot of folks didn't even see it. There was 9 votes in favor of Israel's right to exist, including the United States and Israel. And then the rest of the nations that stood with us against the world, which included Togo and Micronesia and some other islands that most of us probably aren't even familiar with. But it was like 7 or 8 islands and Guatemala.
Yeah.
Stood with the United States. But what I want you to catch is, don't miss the moment. We're now coming to the hour of nations, sheep and goats. It's bigger than just, do you believe in Jesus? It's now, how do we unpack the relevance of Jesus into the spheres of influence, those mountains, so that we can see nations brought to the kingdom of God in a day. Or at least nations embracing the right of Christians to exist and not persecuting Israel. And so God's pushing the nations to the valley of decision. So we have 9 that are for Israel's right to exist. Here's a shocking piece of information. 128 that want to deny Israel's right to exist. And here's another one that's wild. 35 that don't know if they are sheep or goats. They're undecided. In gender studies, this is called transition. They're not sure which gender they are. And you'd be shocked to see Australia undecided.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of enthusiasm. I don't want to lose the pro-life Catholic voters, but I have no enthusiasm for the Pope. He can't even persuade Italy. They voted against the right of Israel.
Wow.
So Rome doesn't evidently have much sympathy for Israel. Singapore, our great friend in Asia, the jewel of the East, voted against Israel. What you're seeing is the 8 years of progressive influence from Obama and the deep state activity of rhinos under Bush, creating a world order that's really for the globalists and for the elite, and not actually for the principle of the right of the Jews to their own homeland. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So, I want you to think about this. We've had the first round of votes. There'll probably be 3 rounds. If the midterms, by the way, go in favor of Trump, you're going to see absolute deliriousness break out on the left. It's going to actually be chaos. Because remember what happened after he was elected? It's chaos in the streets. Remember the inauguration? If you ever saw the burning limo with an Antifa logo on the side and flames coming out, that was my limo. My limo at the inauguration. I just got out, and ironically, it was a Mexican driver who they threw a brick through the window in order to kill him. He got out, damaged his arm, and they threw fire bombs in. So all of the media manipulated the hysteria right now about the violence on the right. I could show you Antifa all over the country and show you the violence on the left. They just finally drove some people that are demonized crazy enough to start manifesting. But it's what the left has done to create a culture where people that are mentally unstable now are freaking out. So, what we have here is these sheep and goat nations. We have the battle for these mountains. We're looking now for the courageous champions that are going to rise up in each of these fields. And notice what they are. They are people with ideas that they have the courage to defend powerfully. We need people that are oracles for truth. All right, so what happens? Donald Trump goes ahead and he authorizes this, the nations. And they go into the valley of decision. Here's something you need to look at, and then wrap it up. But this picture's worth 1,000 words, because I'm now meeting with, last night, I'm meeting with people that, we open doors to presidents and to administrations. But when I go to them, I'm interested in one thing. I'm interested in seeing if they're interested in moving their embassy to Jerusalem so they can stand with Israel. And that's not really an incentive for a politician to have to do something. Although we have the open door, because a lot of my friends are faith advisors to the president, and even though they're not representing the president, everybody knows that really, in a sense, are someone to entertain, at least meet with them. I said, that's not good enough. So what we've got now is economics, because you see, we're not just about the spiritual. This is Christians always think about Israel and the spirit. What we got to think about is business, and how business can help government, because you see, a good Jewish idea would be that if we can get you to embrace the right of freedom of religion to be here, the Jew and the Christian, to not be persecuted, And if doing so unleashes the blessing and favor of God upon your nation, then you will be blessed, because blessed is that nation whose God is the Lord. And even a hardened pragmatist like Mr. Trump, the president, understands the value of having the evangelical base behind it. And what I want to do is I want to open up the arenas in Europe to a new generation of statesmen and evangelists like Billy Graham to be able to speak in Hungary and in Poland, so that they can have a powerful surge of end-time harvest, putting Christian values and worldview into the population, so that it's kind of like an antivirus against the propaganda going through the world right now. So they will stand with the stability of their Cyruses, who may not become talking evangelical Pentecostals. They may just be steely-eyed pragmatists who God's worked with through common grace to give them a compass that says, yeah, I believe that's a good thing. Let's do it. That's the president's God rising right now. America has a $21 trillion economy. China, trying to displace us, has an $11 trillion economy. Down here, you've got France, Germany, Japan. You've got the $3 to $4 trillion economy. And this is a disproportionate graph. It really isn't doing this right. Because at the bottom of this is 500, half a trillion to $1 trillion economy. 170 nations right now are not players in the economic game. But nations are his inheritance. How many of you know that God doesn't care if you're big or if you're small? Nations are God's idea. Acts 17 says that out of one blood he's made all the nations and has given them boundaries and habitations and time. Meaning that nations are God's idea. And he's given them boundaries, which means borders. And a unique glory that each nation has that it can exhibit. There's a glory for Israel. There's a glory for France. There's a glory in the Philippines. And so what you want to do is you want to find out what the glory is that you exhibit. You want to respect the boundaries that contain that unique nation. And then you've got to recognize the time period in which God's visiting it, because his goal is that they might grope after him and find him. Let me summarize this for you. Because your church, I believe, is going to be right on the front lines of this. Only 5% of the body of Christ actually is what we call a remnant. The remnant were the people that responded to Cyrus. The remnant responded to Cyrus. Esther chapter 1 verse 1 tells you it was a remnant that heard Cyrus's decree, understood politically what was going on, and got in alignment with God's will. So where we are now, we've got a $21 trillion economy. China's $11 trillion. They want to knock us off. We've got a debt problem, but they can't do it yet. There's 170 nations. And then you have Israel down here with a $1 trillion, like a $1 trillion economy. But watch this. What God's doing right now is he's taking Christians here in the United States in a unique collaboration of political, prophetic, and businessmen. It's like Haggai prophecy. It's Zerubbabel, it's Joshua, it's Josiah, it's Joshua, who was the high priest, Zerubbabel, who was governmental, getting the business thing going, and then it was Haggai the prophet. So the prophetic, the governmental, business, marketplace people, and the church leaders, the teachers, the Ezras, they're coming together in a unique way, collaboration. So I'm meeting them right now. And here's what we're doing. We're looking at creating individual trade that can happen between nation states. The United States, for instance, you can do trade with Oklahoma, you can do trade with Israel, you can do trade with Guatemala. We're starting with Guatemala because Guatemala was the first sheep nation to acknowledge Israel. Before us, Guatemala acknowledged Israel's right to exist in 1947, and they did it again with the embassy. So we've got a deal going. The United States of America now, we have states that are going to do trade with Guatemala, and then we're going to tie in Tel Aviv and Israel in this triangulation. And Israel is committed to do something like $1 billion worth of investment into Guatemala because they stood with them on the embassy.
Wow.
But what we're saying is that we want to create trade alliances. Now we're going to talk to Hungary, we're going to talk to Poland, we're going to talk to all these little nations down here, because every one of those nations has a resource or a glory that God gave it to put them in the game. Right now they're being overlooked by the greed of world banks, Goldman Sachs, because the bankers don't care. Their game is all between the big dogs. But we're going to go after the little guys. And we're going to find one area where they have a glory or an asset that can lift them from poverty into flourishing. And the condition is acknowledging the right of Israel to exist and having freedom of religion, so they will not persecute Christians or Jews, or any religion will tell them, so they don't say the politically correct language is all religion, but I'm actually trying to protect Christians and Jews. Because I know Muslims aren't going to be hunted by people. So, what you have here is this new alliance. So what happens then is you have multiple trading options between nations, and we control the platform that literally will fund an economic alternative for the survival of sheep nations as nations are going for and against. And the defining issue is going to be the blessing of God economically and governmentally. As they're opening their nation up to the gospel, God will bring domestic tranquility and peace so that people won't be fired up because the gospel puts a law of conscience in. And so the rulers are going to see the pragmatic value of how Christianity does what certainly Islam does the opposite of, which inflames people to acts of violence. Christianity actually practices a culture of restraint and forgiveness.
Yes, we do.
And the nations that embrace that, even for whatever cynical reasons they do, will recognize the prosperity of that and the alliance with Donald Trump in the New World Order.
Yes.
We have a window, people.
Yep.
Ezra 9:8 and 9:9 says, we'll finish with this. He said, God has given us a window, a brief time of revival. And what Ezra says is, it's a revival of the remnant. So don't be looking for the rest of the body of Christ to give you signals that they're in revival. We're kind of stupid at it. We're looking for the next flash in the plan, the next Toronto, the next let's go. Forget it. This revival is in the remnant.
Yeah.
The reviving of a remnant, Ezra says, Ezra 9:9, check it out. The restoration of the house, which is the church, the ecclesia, coming back into its authority and engaging all of culture, not just its own media programs. So it's a reviving of the remnant, the restoration of the house, and the repairing and rebuilding of the wall.
Yeah.
And the wall, studying Proverbs 25, doesn't refer to Mexico. It says that a person who is without self-control is like a city without walls. The enemy can come in and plunder you.
Yeah.
We're restoring the boundaries of civility and discipline. We're literally restoring and redefining what are the boundaries of truth and error in our own culture, and what are the boundaries around our nation, so that we can have a city that can't be plundered, or a nation that won't be destroyed because of a lack of self-control or a lack of ability to govern ourselves anymore.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And you know, this is the Antioch call, because this is where the church has to go from its salvation, its survival, or its political. It's much more elegant and complicated than that. It's a battle of persuasion and ideas. It's taking the spheres separately, and whatever sphere you're called to, you got to pray more about how God wants you to go up in it and influence it. But at the end of the day, these flags represent the emerging sheep nations, and that requires that they be nations that start, and leaders and Christians and governments that start to think in terms of that Jesus is the Lord of all the earth. He's the God of business, as well as the God of arts and truth-telling and media and governments. The government shall be upon his shoulders. Government is not your enemy. Government can be your friend. You have to influence government.
Yes.
The centurion on board the ship the Apostle Paul was on kept them from killing him. Government can protect you from your enemies. So Father, we pray in Jesus' name for the outpouring of the reviving in the remnant. What sort of reviving is this? It's a lifting up into heavenly places, to be able to hear the discourse and the purpose of God, and to be able to come back down in pragmatic